Hey guys, welcome to the Liberal Hive Mind, a channel solely focused on exposing the abundant hypocrisy of the left. At this point, it can only be two things. Either it's pure stupidity, or honestly, it's some sort of humiliation fetish. Charlemagne the God and his show, The Breakfast Club. I don't know what these people are thinking. You know that whole trope of politically uninformed, uneducated people pretending like they know and understand everything, as if they could step into the ring with an actual expert on topics. Generally, this type of character archetype is ascribed to like 15-year-old kids who think they've figured out the whole world. That's pretty much the Breakfast Club. They have no legitimate place debating anyone. Discussion, sure, but taking hardline stances and debating actual experts, yeah, that's not your realm, that's not your domain. Yet they do it over and over again and end up looking like complete fools. A couple weeks ago with Vivek Ramaswamy, this time on the issue of systemic racism, in a conversation, or I guess you could call it debate, with Larry Elder, probably the last person that you should be debating these ideas if you're an actual know-nothing. But alas, for our entertainment, the Breakfast Club did exactly what they normally do. They completely embarrassed themselves as they stepped completely out of their depth. Let me show you guys exactly what I mean by that. We got some stuff to get into, so let's roll the tape. Alright folks, so it's a 1-hour discussion. I watched the whole thing, but obviously we're only going to cover a couple parts here. But trust me that I tell you that a couple clips from this interaction pretty much distills the whole thing. The way that I'd describe it is two contending views. You have one view, which is the Larry Elder view, where he's decided, I'm going to look at the cold, hard facts. I'm not going to play into this victim ideology. I'm going to look for the problem. I'm going to look for solutions. What needs to happen to fix these complex problems moving forward. And then you have the other side, which wants to find any excuse in the book to make it somebody else's problem, somebody else's fault. Everything is racism. Everything is out of our control. It's not a cultural problem. No, it's a systemic racism problem. Larry Elder started off with a very simple comparison, which I think most people should be able to understand and agree with, but apparently, when it comes to the woke, it goes right over their heads.
All the things that made black people still survive in virulent racism are now under attack by organizations like Black Lives Matter.
All of those things have always been under attack by white supremacy. You can go back to things like whether it's the Tulsa race massacres, like every time black people do create these systems that are our systems and we are the entrepreneurs, it seems like white supremacy finds a way to destroy it.
Every time, look, the Tulsa massacre, within about 5 years, that whole area was rebuilt. It was not even called the Black Wall Street until after it was rebuilt. And it was rebuilt, by the way, by black people without one dime of government money.
Yeah, who destroyed it to begin with?
It was racists who destroyed it. No question about it. We've had race riots, but so have Japanese.
So you do agree that there's racism? I'm just so confused.
I never even came close to saying. I never came close to saying there was no racism.
You just saying you don't think it's systemic racism?
Not anymore. Obviously, there was. We had something called slavery. We had something called Jim Crow.
That destroyed black. Hold on, sir. That was the system that destroyed Black Wall Street. It's the same system right now that's not even wanting to pay those same living descendants, because I know your position on reparations, but those same living descendants of Black Wall Street.
Okay.
And then you go on to say that the system, the quote unquote system, is also trying to destroy President Trump. So I'm just so confused on, do you believe that the system can destroy or not? You pick and choose, sir, and that's what's so confusing to me. You just said it wasn't racism. Now it is racism. When it was time to build it back, there was no racism.
I said it wasn't systemic racism. Let's talk about.
So what are you just hung up on the word system?
Can I just make this point, Charlemagne, please? Let's take Chinese Americans. Chinese Americans were the first ethnic group to be excluded with an immigration act in the late 1800s. They had riots against Chinese in LA, in San Francisco. There were laws that prevented Chinese Americans from participating in the laundry business. I'm in California. California, of course, rounded up Japanese Americans during World War II. There were laws that prevented Japanese Americans from owning farmland. The average Japanese American household has a higher per capita income than the average white household. The average Chinese American household has a higher per capita income than the average white household. How does that happen? It happens because of a strong belief in family. It is rare for a Chinese American or a Japanese American kid to have a child outside of wedlock, and a strong belief in education and a strong belief in entrepreneurship. These are the kinds of qualities that make people successful.
It's also in our communities heavy food deserts. There's nothing but fast food places that are just killing and destroing that. Would you say that's true?
Systemic too, by the way.
Boy.
You say that's true. I'm just asking a question.
You said a number of things. I just addressed one of them about loans. Mm-hmm. In 1965, Barack Obama, who was in private practice, joined a bunch of other lawyers to file a class action lawsuit against Citicorp, which is headquartered here in New York. 186 Black people were applying for loans for mortgages and didn't get them. And they accused Citicorp of engaging in racism. Citicorp said, no, it's not racism. You have poor credit scores, and we want to make sure we get our money back. Obama joined a bunch of other lawyers, and they sued Citicorp in a class action lawsuit. And Citicorp said, okay, to hell with it. Gave them all loans. They followed them all up. Daily Caller did a few years later. Almost all of them lost their homes. Several of them filed for bankruptcy. One of them even said, when you don't qualify for a loan, maybe we shouldn't get a loan. Well, duh. It wasn't true that Black people were not getting loans. Plus, there are all sorts of Black-owned community banks around the country, and it turns out the turn-down rate when you apply for a loan at a community bank was even higher because they had less capital and they couldn't afford to loan money to risky people. It is just not the case that the reason for the plight of the Black community is because people were not lending money to them. It's just not true.
So the point that Larry made is that historically, Black people aren't the only people who were oppressed and discriminated against. The Chinese and Japanese communities experienced similar problems, albeit not to the same extent, but they certainly aren't part of this white privilege group that the left loves to identify, yet they've been incredibly successful in the American system. In fact, in many cases, in most metrics, as a whole, they're more successful than their white counterparts. Charlemagne the God's crew went straight to the ignorant leftist talking point that, well, there's systemic racism when it comes to loans and banking relationships in the Black community. Look, I don't care what the Washington Post wrote. I don't care, whatever leftist studies there are out there that claim this to be the case. There have been multiple lawsuits filed, class action lawsuits, that have all failed in this exact pursuit. The simple fact of the matter is, there is no banking discrimination against African American applicants. Very simply, it's based on one thing and one thing alone: your credit. How bankable are you? The idea that banks would be discriminating against loaning money which they make money on. For Pete's sakes, banks don't discriminate against drug cartels. What makes you think there's some systemic racist system in place to stop them from giving loans to people based on the color of their skin? It's absurd. In fact, the bank is so desperate to give out these loans that in 2008, they caused a freaking economic crisis because they were handing out loans willy-nilly to people with terrible credit scores. It all comes down to one very simple concept. Are you bankable? In the world of finance, the most important thing is your credit score. The most important thing is provable income, financial statements, and credit. Whether you pay your debt on time. Are you a credible person when it comes to money and paying your loans? If you have all that stuff in place, you're going to get a loan. That's literally the way the system works. Instead of focusing on financial education, financial literacy, a culture that focuses on learning and teaching these skills, because really they're skills, it's knowledge, the Breakfast Club, representing this systemic racist ideology, will have you believe that actually banks are just real racist. Patently absurd. Larry Elder completely dismantled them across the board. This interaction on systemic racism lasted like 20 minutes or so. And like I said in the intro, pretty much distilled the entire conversation. It was nothing but this for an hour straight. When it comes to this issue, the left does not want to look at the facts. The facts are that there are communities who have very strong beliefs when it comes to families sticking together. In fact, in many Asian communities, divorce is highly frowned upon. There's very strong and enforced family standards when it comes to academic pursuits, and of course a culture of financial literacy, meaning kids who are growing up in these families have a mom and dad in the home raising them right. They're going to school, they're getting educated, and they're being taught financial literacy. Not only how to save money, but how to use money, how to develop a relationship with the bank. When it comes to personal finance, when it comes to moving forward, the bank is literally your best friend. The local bank branch in your neighborhood, that as long as you're credible, as long as you have good credit, will give you an 80% loan, meaning all you have to do is present 20% in cash and they'll give you 80%. Which allows you to swing above your weight class. That's how you move up in the world. But when someone like Larry Elder presents these ideas and say, hey, this is what we're missing, this is what we should be teaching our kids, this should be our cultural standard, the Los Angeles Times dubs him the blackface of white supremacy. I mean, the whole thing is a bad joke. When Larry Elder shows up on a show like The Breakfast Club, people should be all ears. People should be listening. What does this man have to say? Frankly, what does this living legend have to say? Larry Elder's knowledge and intellect intellect is 1,000 times the combined intellectual prowess of that entire discussion panel. Yet instead of listening, they want to debate him. When he tells them systemic racism doesn't exist, we gotta be better, they tell him, no, we don't have to change anything. The problem isn't us, the problem is the system. Yet at every point in turn along the entire discussion, their ignorance shines through. On every topic, they know absolutely nothing, yet they take these hardline stances and reject his fact-based ideas. Here is a great example from the interaction where Charlemagne the God proves how completely clueless he is on daily political topics. Here he is at some point mentioning the, quote, banning of black history in the state of Florida.
What's your thoughts with Florida? And you see that they're trying to take our history out of these history books and not trying to teach our history. What's your thoughts?
I find it interesting that the Democrats are the ones complaining about Florida. This is a party of slavery, party of Jim Crow, the party of the KKK, the party of the Southern Manifesto, the party of Dred Scott, the party that I said earlier destroyed the nuclear intact family, and the party that is opposing school choice. And now they want to lecture Florida on making sure the proper history of slavery is taught. I don't know anybody who's defending slavery. Anybody. Not Ron DeSantis. He's not defending.
People benefited from slavery.
Actually, you're talking about one line. You're talking about one line in about 127 pages of the study, and it is a line that was repeated almost verbatim in the associated in the advanced placement African American course that the DeSantis administration refused to use because of all of the sexual stuff that was in it. It's basically the same thing that was in the advanced placement African American courses, and now because it's in that, all of a sudden the governor is accused of somehow defending slavery. He's not doing anything of the sort.
What did you think about
that? Well,
sir,
you were actually one that defended slavery.
He literally doesn't know what he's saying, presenting a fake news Democrat talking point as if it's fact or as if it's even relevant to the conversation. No, Florida isn't justifying slavery. They're teaching the exact same thing that's part of the AP curriculum, that once slavery ended, certain skills developed actually benefited some of the people who were freed, and they ended up starting businesses themselves. That's a historical fact. And Larry once again cleared the record, showing just how ignorant leftist ideologues are. I know Charlemagne the God loves to say that he's not a Democrat, but he literally is. He's like the pure essence of a Democrat. He just loves this sort of holier than thou, no, I'm not on any side kind of attitude. The reason the AP history curriculum was axed in the state of Florida was mostly due to the gender ideology and queer theory that was intermingled in the teachings of black history. There's a recent poll that pretty much backs the sentiment up, quote, that too much time is being spent on gender issues, sexual orientation, and social issues, and not enough time on reading, writing, math, science, and the basics.
Pandemic, we've certainly seen an increase in the number of parents speaking out about what's being taught in their kids' schools. Now some new Fox News polling shows how voters feel about what's happening inside America's classrooms. The numbers in our survey finding voters feel overall not enough time being spent on reading, writing, math, science, the basics here. Instead, Americans feeling too much time being spent on gender issues, sexual orientation, and social issues. Now, perhaps not surprisingly, there is a political punch to these polls, with Republicans most concerned too much time is being spent on the sexual orientation and gender issue. But fascinating, independent voters here speaking up, feeling that they are also more concerned than Democratic voters on the subject.
And it brings us right back to what I was mentioning earlier. This is part of the problem. Victim ideology, grievance ideology, gender ideology is being promoted above actual relevant skills and knowledge that would benefit people. What ought to be taught at a very early age is critical thought and basic financial literacy. The whole thing's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and Larry Elder is trying so hard to fight against it. I tried picking the one part where it shows the dynamic between the two sides, these sort of conflicting ideologies, but I really suggest that you guys go watch the entire interview yourselves. You'll see exactly what I'm talking about here in a much more detailed manner. It's victor ideology versus victim ideology. And the folks at the Breakfast Club want so badly to monetize being a victim, being a freedom fighter, a social activist, instead of just sticking to the damn basics. The basics are what get you where you need to go. Hard work, family traditions, family values, understanding of money. It's not more complicated than that. Larry Elder said it best himself.
This is a flawed country. It's moving forward. It's becoming more perfect all the time. Today, if you are born and raised in America, if you finish high school, presumably one where you can read, write, and compute at grade level, which is why I support school choice. Don't have a kid before you're 20, get married first, Get a job, keep a job, don't quit it until you get another job, and avoid the criminal justice system. You will not be poor. And if you don't follow that formula, there's a good chance you will be.
You simply do the right things. It's a very simple formula, and it's virtually impossible to fall below the poverty line. Maybe embrace that kind of ideology instead of this constant grift of this white supremacist boogeyman, this systemic racist boogeyman. It's a vicious cycle of blaming something else instead of taking accountability and progressing forward. And obviously it's led nowhere good. I don't see how that's magically gonna change after something like slavery reparations is achieved. It simply makes no sense. You can't throw money at a problem and expect it to just magically fix itself. If anything, it's probably gonna make the problem worse. Like Larry also mentioned,
1995, when 186 black people who were not getting loans filed a class action lawsuit claiming that they were denied the loan because of racism. Citicorp said, okay, here are your loans. The reason I wasn't giving you the loans is because we're afraid you weren't going to be able to pay them back.
I'm not talking about
Fast forward, they weren't able to pay them back, which proved the Citicorp point.
Sir, I'm not talking about that.
the banks have already tried it before, handing out loans to people who aren't qualified as a form of social justice and undoing inequality. Nearly every single individual who received those loans ended up bankrupt. It's the simple concept of teaching a person to fish rather than giving them a fish. Anyways, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. You know, it's kind of hard to make these videos, especially with the quick turnover, to distill the essence of a 1-hour conversation in 12 to 15 minutes. Hopefully I did a decent job. Hopefully you guys appreciated what I had to say. If you did, make sure to leave a like and possibly subscribe to the channel. You know that we'd love to have you here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.